My name is Katie and this is the Enchanted Fibres knitting channel. I'll essentially be talking about all things knitting in every video. Usually it'll be a knitting podcast. In this case, today's video is a how to sort of guide pattern video, and it's my first stab at it, but I think I've made it quite detailed and easy to follow along. So yeah, without further ado, let's begin. This is how to turn this essentially into this, a knit version. And I came up with this idea, mostly it started actually as a brainstorming session on what I could do with a sweater that I've now frogged, and I'll insert B-roll of some kind. The sweater I frogged, I guess maybe less than a month ago at this point, and it's with this velvet yarn. I bought the yarn back during COVID. I think I just got excited about the idea. I didn't think about the practicality of it necessarily. I made the sweater and I didn't like how it fit. It wasn't really my style by the time I finished it. It was not something I was ever going to wear. And there was part of it in the back that I think I just made a mistake on, or the pattern was wrong. I could go check. I haven't bothered. Either way, it's been frogged. I needed something that I thought I could make out of the yarn. I didn't want it to go to waste, but something that I would actually wear. I started looking into patterns for pajama shorts, lounge shorts, however you want to call them. And I was kind of realizing that, okay, I don't actually need to pay for this. Like, I have a sewing background. Actually, before I knit, I sewed. And I think that came in handy with this idea. So don't mind me if I look at my laptop to the bottom, in my case, the bottom left. It has my notes. It kind of has a guide of what I want to talk about in this video. This is a pretty hefty video, but I want to be as concise as possible so that it's clear. I'm going to be using a lot of visual things on the screen that you can screenshot or write down, whatever you want. So before I get into the nitty-gritty of this, I wanted to come up with a way that would make it very easy, like this, by it I mean this video, very easy to follow along, very easy to execute successfully. And I thought, I love Excel. I mean, who doesn't like Excel? And I made a document, I guess is what you would call it, an Excel sheet that involves you measuring your shorts and putting in your gauge swatch, which I'll explain a bit later. All you gotta do is fill those variables in and it'll calculate everything else for you. I tested it myself with my own pair of shorts just to make sure it was working. I'm not saying it's necessarily flawless, and it's completely free. So with that being said, you're not paying to use it. It's just in the link in the description box. So if you'd like to use it, it's there. It'll make everything a lot easier, and you'll be able to skip majority of this video by using it. Step one is to measure. Take your existing pair of shorts and, using the diagrams I'm putting on the screen right now, measure each of those measurements and write them down on a piece of paper, on your computer, wherever's handy for you. So step two is to make a gauge swatch. So essentially you just need to figure out how many stitches and how many rows gets you 4 inches each way, and then write that down. If you're using the Excel tool, you should be logging your measurements and your gauge in that Excel tool. Step 3, calculating stitches and row counts. So for the Excel tool users, if you've already put in your measurements for your front panels, back panels, and waistband, and if you filled in your gauge swatch in each of the blue boxes, then you are good to start knitting your pattern. And I now release you from this video at least until the chapter I'm gonna put right here. So for calculating your stitch count, you're essentially going to take your measurement. So for example, measurement A, divide that by your gauge swatch size, in this case, 4 inches. So measurement A divided by 4 inches. And that number you have, you're going to multiply that by the amount of stitches it took for you to meet gauge. Then similar for any vertical measurements, which would be your row count, you'll take your row measurement, let's say it's measurement B on the front panel, Divide that by the size of your gauge swatch, in this case 4 inches, and then you're going to multiply that number you get by the amount of rows it took for you to meet gauge. So that is an example of how you would calculate both rows and stitches. Write down all of your stitch and row counts for each measurement I have put on the diagram, in this case A through F for the front panel. And in addition to that, add the following labels. So I have E plus F, which is adding E and F stitches together into one number. C minus B, which is subtracting C rows from B rows. And then in brackets, E plus F minus A. So what this means is you need to subtract A, the amount of stitches for A, from E plus F added together. Now, in terms of calculating increases, take your E plus F minus A total, because this is the amount of stitches you'll need to increase. Take your E plus F minus A total, so the amount of stitches you need to increase, and multiply that number by 2. In my case, I've called that increase amount times 2. So very literal. And that is the amount of rows that will be required for your increasing, because you'll be increasing once or twice on the knit row, and then the purl row you'll be purling all the way through. So that's why. Now take your B, in this case for the front panel, it's a row count. Your B row count, subtract that from the increase amount times 2 variable that you have. That number you get is the amount of rows you will be knitting before you begin your increasing. If you do get a negative number, this means you cannot make enough increases in the amount of rows that are remaining for your shorts. So you can adjust this by making 2 increases per row instead of 1. And to adjust what you've written down so far for this, instead of subtracting B from your increase amount times 2 variable, you just need to subtract B from your increase amount variable, which is also equal to E plus F minus A. And then knitting wise, the adjustment you'll be making here is, instead of knitting 1 increase per row, there'll be 2 increases per row. The last calculation you need to make for the front panel is for binding off the shorts and essentially shaping that base. To start, write down base shaping rows, base shaping rows divided by 2, E side bind off, and F side bind off. Base shaping rows is your C row count, subtract your B row count. Base shaping rows divided by 2 is very intuitive. Divide that number you just got by 2. Your E side bind off calculation is your E stitches divided by that number you just got, base shaping rows divided by 2. Your F side bind off is similar to E, so it's your F stitches divided by your base shaping rows divided by 2. Assuming you have all that written down, now we can go into calculating everything we need for our back panel. So in addition to the pre-existing measurements you already have, I need you to create 2 more, which is D minus A, which is subtracting your amount of stitches for A from your D stitches. Then I also need you to write down D minus E, which is subtracting your E stitches from your D stitches. The first part of this, once again, similar to the front panel, but different, is calculating your increases. So I need you to take your D minus A total, which is that number I just got you to calculate. That is the amount of stitches you need to increase throughout the length of your shorts. Now, write down increase amount times 4. And you're probably thinking, why is it times 4 and not times 2? For the sake of the back panel, it just makes the increases a little bit more gradual, and there is more room to do that. The front panel does not have as much room to do gradual decreasing. So once again, or not once again, but very similar to the front panel, that increase amount 4 is essentially because the first increase row, so the knit row, and then there's a purl and a knit and a purl row following that. So 4 rows total. Now take C and subtract the increase amount times 4 number from that. And that is the amount of rows you need to knit evenly, normally, evenly, however you want to think of it, before you increase. I'd like to say if you do get a negative number for this one, that just means you can't do the increase amount times 4. So it just means there's not enough rows to do that gradual decreasing. In this case, you can adjust that by changing it to be times 2, just like the front panel. So instead of multiplying your increase amount times 4, multiply it by 2, and then continue out the calculation as normal. Your last calculation for the back panel is for binding off and shaping the bottom of your shorts, which will be different than your front panel. Please write down the following labels: base shaping rows divided by 2, and D minus E bind off. The base shaping rows is equivalent to your F row count. Base shaping rows divided by 2 is that same number, but divide that by 2. And then D minus E bind off is your D minus E number from earlier, divided by the base shaping rows divided by 2. That's all the calculations for your back panel. Now we'll work on the waistband calculations. You're in luck, this is an easy one. Calculate your waistband width in stitches by just adding your front panel A stitches and your back panel A stitches together, and multiply that total number by 2. This will give you the amount of stitches you need to cast on for your waistband. So to get your waistband height, take the height of your waistband on either your reference pair of shorts or your dream pair of shorts and multiply that by 2 in inches. And then that is the height you need to knit your waistband to. Step 4, knitting pattern instructions. Okay, so for the instructions, I think the easiest way is to screenshot or write down what I'm about to put on screen. So just feel free to pause the video and fill in each amount that I'm asking you for. So what I've done is I've put blanks and I've put what needs to be in that blank. So for example, the first line for the right and the left panel is to cast on A stitches. So fill in what you got for the amount of stitches for A and continue to do the same for the rest of the pattern. I've put it for each one how you calculate it. So most of these are pre-calculated. The only one is increase amount minus 1, which is just taking that amount, which was your increase amount, and then subtracting 1 from it to get the right number. Please do the same thing for both the left and the right panel. Both will be on screen. Then for your back panel and your waistband, I'm going to do the same thing. So please screenshot it, print it, whatever makes sense, write it down. This is, of course, if you're not already using the Excel tool. So once again, with the back panel, the only measurement that isn't already calculated by you is your increase amount minus 1, and it's the same thing as the front panel. Take your increase amount number, whatever it is, and minus 1 from it. For your waistband, cast on your A times 2 stitches, and then knit and stockinette for your B times 2 rows, or until the ideal length of your waistband times 2 is reached. So now that you've determined your patterns, I'm going to call them patterns for each panel, so 2 of the front, 2 of the back, and the waistband, you can begin knitting all of them and return back to this video when those are complete. Step 5 is assembly of the garment. So for the front panels, seam from the top to the bottom of the middle of the 2 panels. Then with your sides, seam from the top to the bottom for both the left and the right side. For the back panels, seam from the top to the bottom, including those skinny flaps. Now, looking at the underside of the shorts, seam the little V-looking shape that you will have at this point. So it'll be attaching the underside of the back panel and the underside of the front panel together. Okay, so my shorts are all seamed. So you'll see this is actually the front panel. I did do the invisible mattress stitch seam for pretty much everything. So because of that, there's no visible seams. And I think if a seam is something, like a visible seam is something that would interest you, part of it, well, this yarn in general, I would say hides everything. Like, I'm sure this isn't even a perfect seaming, and it just hides it because it's like a velvet plushy yarn. But if you did want to do a visible seam, I was thinking a way that might work is at this part of your left panel and at this part of your right panel. So the very last, maybe like 2 columns of stitches. So columns meaning this way. If you did purl stitches, I think it would create like a mock seam look. And then you would just seam it together with a garter seaming method versus, in this case, a stockinette method. Yeah, so you'll see this is actually that area where those 2 flaps were, and they've now merged into this right panel and this left panel. You can kind of see where, because the shaping of the rows is changing. And then the butt panel is all connected. I did have a thought where I was like, would it have made sense to do it as one big panel? But I was reading up on it, and I guess structurally it makes sense to have it as 4 separate panels because seams provide structure, and I think overall are just a little bit better than knitting in a round. I'm excited to see how these fit on me because as of right now, it is like an invisible seam. So I'm curious to see what happens around my butt and if I do have unibutt or not. And then again, I think if it does, I would be curious to recommend to other people. This yarn, it wouldn't have made a difference, I don't think, just because of the type of yarn it is. But if you have a regular yarn, to do those like 2 purl columns at the end, at the insides of each panel, that way it could create like a mock seam, and I just feel like it might add more shape to the butt. It's kind of what I'm thinking. Also, don't mind the fact that I'm like literally filming on my bed sheet. I just thought it's like a neutral background. So I've done that, and now the most important part is the waistband, which I don't have attached yet. So now the waistband. This is a very, very important part of the shorts because it's going to hold everything up. The thing is, these are probably a bit oversized, but I believe it'll work because that's kind of the look I wanted. I didn't want skin tight, and assuming you use my Excel sheet or you kind of figured it out through following this walkthrough, your shorts will be the fit that you're looking for. In this case, I wanted more of a loose, flowy short. So the waistband is very important holding these up. It's knit double the height because it's going to be folded in half. It's going to be holding the elastic, and it's going to be sewn to the top of this. This is pretty exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and get my elastic. And then what I'm thinking the goal is that, so this is the shorts that I was working with. So knowing that, like just feeling this, there's an elastic in these. And the natural width, I'm going to measure this natural width here of it laying flat. And then I'm just going to do double that width plus 1 inch. So I inherited a lot of different elastic pieces. And in this case, I had this in the bag. It's actually the perfect width for what I'm looking for. So I'm just going to use this. It's already sewn. But in your case, if you're cutting the elastic from a fresh piece of elastic, you'll just want to sew it together. It could be something like this. You could put both of the right sides together and just sew as close to the edge as possible with regular thread and needle. This isn't like a full-on tutorial, so I won't show how to sew. However, I'm assuming if you can knit, you can sew, and there's lots of YouTube videos out there as well. But just something simple like this would work to put the two ends of your elastic together. So before putting in the elastic, I recommend taking your waistband piece in the round and seaming the stretchier end to this part of your shorts, your entirely seamed shorts. I've now attached my little in the round waistband panel to my shorts, and now the next step is to put this elastic on the inside. So I think in this case I'm going to flip these inside out. Okay, so now I've flipped it inside out. I've put my elastic band around at the base, and then the goal is to just fold it over and seam. Seam along, and then honestly, after the ends are weaved in, these will be done, and I can do a try on and see how they fit. So I'm not sure if this is the most flawless job, but I have now seamed my elastic band in here, and this gives you an idea of what the front looks like. Let me flip them around. This is now what the front looks like, and I am honestly very, very, very happy with how this is looking. Now I just need to try it on and make sure it all fits. I hope it does. It should. Okay, so this is me trying on the shorts. Not for the first time, but I struggled to actually find a mirror where there wasn't just a big mess in the background. Hopefully that makes me relatable. Overall, they fit perfectly. They look very similar to the pair I was intending to duplicate. And if anything, next time, all I would do is just do a different yarn. I personally would love it if they looked I guess more like bougie. So a nice yarn with a great drape would look really good. And then I think also with this type of yarn, the fact that it is like a very plushy, is that the right word? I'm not sure. But it's very plush. It doesn't have a lot of stitch definition. And I also think like any other yarn would have more stitch definition, and therefore the shorts would probably look a lot different. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope your project turned out flawless. And definitely please tag me on Instagram if you're gonna share a progress or finished object picture. And I'm also going to have a Ravelry project linked in the description below. So if you wanna add to that and share with me your project that way, that works as well. So if you're not sick and tired of me already and are interested in seeing more knitting content, definitely subscribe to my channel. That would really mean a lot, especially because I'm a very new channel. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time.